change the design of this presentation. So, okay, I will start start my presentation about European foreign and security policy in a post-Brexit era amid risks of disintegration. Uh, I would like to say that the results of the referendum in the UK on leaving the EU, where 52% of citizens in 2016 supported Brexit, were a challenge to the integrity of the Union, which forced it to reconsider its foreign policy guidelines. I would like to quote the former High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini, in the foreword of the European Union Global Strategy, which mentioned Brexit as a confirmation of the complexity of the geopolitical situation in which the region finds itself, and a justification for the need to develop a strategy for a joint response to the challenges that have arisen in recent years. The purpose, even existence of our union is being questioned, yet our citizens and the world need a strong European Union like never before. Our wider region has become more unstable and more insecure. The crises within and beyond our borders are affecting directly our citizens' lives. In challenging times, a strong union is one that thinks strategically, shares a vision, and acts together. This is even more true after the British referendum. We will indeed have to rethink the way our union works, but we perfectly know what we work for. We know what our principles, our interests, and our priorities are. This is no time for uncertainty. Our union needs a strategy. We need a shared vision and common action. The concept of strategic autonomy became the central idea of the new strategy, which was designed to increase Europe's ability to rely more on its own efforts in security and defense issues and to reduce dependence on the United States of America, especially amid the election of President Donald Trump, with his claims to European NATO member states about the lack of funding their defense needs at the level of 2% from their GDP. And the basic idea of the strategy is the ability to protect itself from external attacks, like from Russia and China, as the most evident threats to security through better equipment, training, and organization. Another thing is to assist in developing European partners' security and defense capacities. Basically, Brexit had several negative instant implications for the Union because it meant that the EU member states would evidently have to fill the gap without the UK's contribution to the overall budget of the EU, resulting in a financial gap of around 12% for the next multi-annual financial framework starting in 2021. In particular, during the COVID crisis, the European Commission cut the defense fund by more than half to 6 billion, and proposed funding for military mobility was also being dropped. As a nuclear power and a permanent member of the UN Security Council, the UK backed up the CSDP with political weight, and with more than $50 billion budget. For example, in the 2023-24 financial year, the UK spent 54.2 billion pounds on defense, and in the previous year the number was more or less the same. The UK was the largest defense spender actually, and one of several NATO member states to reach the 2% of GDP spending target. On this graph, you can also see such countries as the United States, Greece, and also Poland and Baltic states that also meet the requirements of spending more than 2% of their GDP. Furthermore, the UK brought military and technical expertise and experience to the Brussels institutions, such as the EU Military Committee, the EU military staff, and the European Defence Agency. But on the other hand, the UK originally relied more on cooperation with the United States in nuclear, intelligence, diplomacy, technology, military fields. And only a short period of time between the St. Malo Declaration of 1998 and the Iraq War in 2003, when the UK recognized the EU having the capacity for autonomous action. But in general, the British always thought and declared that the NATO is the basis for the collective defense of its members, and it was reluctant to develop defense initiatives within the EU. Even though it launched the CSDP together with France in 1998, and by the way, it stood behind the founding of also European Diplomacy Service, known as European External Action Service in 2010. It was under the initiative of Catherine Ashton, its first chairwoman. The British government has subsequently been opposed to further integration in the policy area of security and defense. After its withdrawal from the EU, the UK government aims to maintain close relationships with the EU and to play a proactive role in tackling security threats. The EU created several important programs, and I want to talk more in detail about such programs as Pesco, about such institutions as European Defence Fund and European Peace Facility. So on 13 of November 2017, 23 EU member states declared their willingness to engage in PESCO activities, which stands for a permanent structured cooperation. Federica Mogherini referred to this as a historic moment in European defense, and later two other member states joined the group, Ireland and Portugal, after their respective parliaments gave their consent. And finally, PESCO was established with 25 member states undertaking to act within the PESCO framework and with the initial list of 17 projects, but now it increased to 60 projects covering different fields like cyber, air training facilities, and even space. The key proposal in agreement with NATO and led by the Netherlands, supported by 24 out of 25 PESCO members, is a mobility initiative of 6.5 billion euros to facilitate moving heavy arms like artillery and tanks through Europe in case of war or some other kind of military escalation. Those capabilities, including roads, railways, and bureaucratic permissions, have been largely abandoned with the Soviet collapse, since the security environment in Europe after the end of the Cold War were no longer perceived as that which poses threats. So work in this area could improve the overall information exchange between the EU and NATO, as well as set as a high standard for cooperation. However, There are still some challenges, especially um, uh, it is about different document classification practices, for example, non-security clearances, which are not equal in all member states, and there is the lack of strong cooperation mechanisms. Overall, military mobility has the potential to provide a positive precedent for EU-NATO cooperation, and given Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, member states as of January 2024 agreed to front-load military mobility budget in order to accelerate and maximize support to such dual-use military and civilian transport infrastructure. Uh, the European Commission allocated 807 million euros to military mobility projects, and overall, the Commission is now supporting 95 military mobility projects with a total of 1.7 billion euros. The European Defence Fund supports companies across member states which develop different defense projects with the accent on innovations and interoperable defense technologies and equipment. It offers support and advice to participants through the entire cycle of research and development, and it has a budget of nearly 8 billion euros for 2021-2027, with 2.7 billion euros allocated for collaborative defense research and 5.3 billion euros for collaborative capability development projects that complement national contributions. The financial support is offered primarily through grants up to 100% of eligible costs on activities involved, and a bonus systems that considers small and middle enterprises, mid-caps, and connection to a Pesco project. The European Defence Fund is implemented through annual work programs structured along 34 thematic and horizontal categories of actions along the objectives set in the multi-annual financial framework. The program is implemented directly by the Commission, and the third breakthrough, which I would like to mention, is European Peace Facility, created in 2021 as some kind of the instrument that enables the European Union for the first time in its history to send lethal weapons to a third country. uh, Basically, now Ukraine is the biggest recipient of aid from European Peace Facility, but originally it was created by the EU to cover the cost of its own military missions and to fund the training and equipment of uh, peacekeeping forces for the African Union, for example, which is responsible now, as of November 2023, for 10% of allocations from the European Peace Facility budget, and also for military alliances like the Regional Security Alliance known as G5 Sahel. As the EPF allows the EU for the first time to supply weapons, the Union is hoping that it will forge stronger military partnerships, which will boost its reputation as a security actor. Significant in the context of Ukraine that from the very first days of a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, on February 28, 2022, the Council of the EU approved 450 million euros to Ukraine for military aid and a further 50 million euros for fuel and protective equipment. On March 2024, the Council decided to increase the financial ceiling of the European Peace Facility by 5 billion euros in current prices and establish a dedicated Ukraine Assistance Fund within the EPF. The newly established fund will allow the EU to further support the evolving needs of the Ukrainian armed force through the provision of both lethal and non-lethal military equipment and training. And it is uh, uh, and it will total over. It is expected that it will total over 17 billion euros for the 2021-2027 period. However, never according the Ukraine support tracker data until the end of June 2024, it is still less than, for example, the EUF contribution with a total of 75.1 billion euro in allocations, among which 51.6 billion euros were allocated as military aid. The election of Joe Biden in the United States in 2021 brought the expectation of the Euro-Atlantic unity to be reconciled with the strategic autonomy of the EU, but the later Russian invasion of Ukraine was perceived by European leaders as an attack on the institutions of the EU and a test for European strategic autonomy. For example, Emmanuel Macron in April 2023 called for the EU to reduce its dependence on the US to attain strategic autonomy away from Washington and avoid being drawn into a confrontation between the US and China over Taiwan. Macron has also advocated that Europe should become a third superpower, and according to him, Europe should focus on boosting its own defense industries and on reducing dependence on the US dollar. Internal EU divisions, which Russia has also played, where Russia has also played its role since the EU's enlargement, have long impeded the European unity. And for example, the wave of statements by representatives of Eurosceptic parties after their Brexit referendum about the need to hold similar referendums in other EU countries, for example, from Marine Le Pen in France, in Italy as well. However, against the backdrop of the difficulties of the Brexit implementation process in Britain itself, these theses disappeared from the agenda. And but anyway, the strengthening of the voice of Eurosceptics in recent years is still noticeable, and within the European institutions as well, which affected the implementation of common foreign and security policy, for example, in the field of sanctions against Russia, which, for example, Hungarian parties called to lift from Russia. And the latest elections to the European Parliament also demonstrate that the pro-EU centrist, liberal, and other kinds of parties suffered losses, while anti-EU right-wing populist parties made benefits. For example, the right-wing European Conservatives and Reformists group overtook the Renew Europe group. It won the fourth most seats, while another right-wing group, Patriots for Europe, the successor of Identity and Democracy, won the third most seats. In addition, many other groups of right-wing and populist politicians were formed in the European Parliament. Finally, member states should use this moment to sustain the momentum for a more common foreign and security policy, while they should certainly push for qualified majority voting in CFSP. expand the remit of military mobility beyond the confines of the EU and NATO and increase their commitment to European Defence Union initiatives, they must also consider the far-reaching implications of the decision to mobilize funding for lethal equipment for the very first time. And that's the end of my presentations. So I want to thank you all for attention. And if there are any kind of questions, I might respond.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. And our next speaker will be Ms. Nikolich from University of Post-Brexit, and she will talk about the strategic importance of cyber transatlantic cooperation.
Hello, everyone. Do you hear me? Just to check my microphone first.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you. I will share my slides. Just a second. Do you see my slides?
Yes, we see presentation.
Okay, thank you. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Before we dive in, I would like to start with question. Have you ever wondered why the cyber relationship between the European Union and the United States is so meaningful? This is precisely what we're going to explore today. By the end of this presentation, you will have a bit more clear understanding of the strategic importance of cyber transatlantic cooperation. So let's get started and dive into it. So in an era where threats are increasingly complex and pervasive, transatlantic cooperation between the European Union and the United States has become strategically essential. A unified approach is vital as cyber attacks target critical infrastructure. They disrupt economies and threaten national securities. This cooperation bolsters cybersecurity defenses and strengthens the shared commitment to upholding democratic values, securing digital economies, and ensuring global stability in the cyber domain. So the strategic importance of the partnership cannot be overstated, as it forms the backbone of a resilient and secure digital future. So in agenda, I will present how to understand EU's approach and transatlantic cyber and NATO. So just to first clarify, cyber diplomacy has become increasingly important as cyber threats like ransomware, vipers, and espionage grow more sophisticated, threatening the EU democracy, economy, and security. The EU and US share standard norms in cybersecurity, emphasizing international cooperation, a private sector involvement, and the protection of human rights without compromising any securities. So enhanced cooperation between the European Union and the United States is vital, focusing on infrastructure security, incident management, quantum-safe cryptography, and artificial intelligence. This collaboration aims to protect mutual interests and mitigate the risk posed by the cyber interdependencies. Cyber diplomacy can also be understood as a means of de-escalation. What means, for example, in spring 2019, in response to Iranian provocation to Persian Gulf, the United States ordered an offensive cyber operation. In this case, the cyber counter reaction was preferable to deploying troops and risking a significant escalation. An Atlantic Council study explains how cyber operations have tended to offer great powers, escalators, off-ramps, without engaging military forces. The European Union is highly skilled in cyber awareness, research, and education, yet remains a frequent target of cyber attacks. Cyber diplomacy seeks multilateral agreements on cyber norms and responsible behavior, aiming for securing global digital governance under international law. This involves partnerships with countries, organizations, businesses, civil society, and experts to foster an open, free, stable, and secure cyberspace. In this graph, we can see that in 2023, ransomware was the most commonly identified cyber attack globally, which led to compromising approximately 70% of all detected incidents. Network breaches followed closely behind, accounting for nearly 19% of detections. Additionally, although less common, data exfiltration incidents were also identified among the cyber attacks detected. Our European Commission guidance is practically based on, let's say, 5 main things. One is resilience. So here we are talking about strengthening institutions to respond to and recover from cyber threats effectively. We are talking also about the diplomacy, ensuring international agreements to maintain an open, accessible, and secure cyberspace. We are talking about sustainable growth. We are practically talking about fostering inclusive growth through the sustainable development of digital infrastructure. After that, we can talk about digital markets, enhancing digital markets and ensuring a secure online economy. And at the last, we are talking about cyber defense, developing strategies to protect military networks, assets, and defense institutions. In this figure, we can see European countries with cyber strategies and representatives. So to have a bit view how this looks like, we are acknowledging the pervasive nature of cyber threats. So all EU member states have established their cyber strategies, as shown in figure 1. Additionally, some countries have appointed their cyber ambassadors, envoys, or representatives, and have created specific sub-strategies focused on cyber defense. There is also a proposal to appoint an EU special representative for international cyberspace policy, which can advocate for EU's positions on the global stage. These are key cyber-related strategy points. So we have EU commitment to critical infrastructure protection and cyber crisis management. We are talking about strengthening technological capabilities for comprehensive cyber resilience. And we are talking about how to enhance cyber cooperation with partners through public and private partnerships, and how to mainstream cyber security across all EU policy areas. So what we can say here that European Union commits to supporting critical infrastructure protection and managing cyber crisis, fostering cooperation among member states on political, operational, and technical cyber matters. European Union also advocates for strengthening technological capabilities to enhance cyber resilience across various domains, integrating cyber issues into all EU policy domains, and improving cyber collaboration with critical partners, international organizations, and at last, public and private partnerships. Here, I would like to point out a very interesting research that I read, and this was written by Mr. Dimitris Anaktandoulis, and he wrote in the Journal of Cyber Policy, where he questions whether the EU, European Union, and United States have made tangible progress in implementing transatlantic cybersecurity norms. So what is here important that he noticed that while there is evidence of effective coordination on issues like the Budapest Convention and cybercrime, there has been less progress in developing public and private partnerships. So if we talk about then how this further will be developed, we talk about bilateral European-US cybersecurity cooperations. We can see perspective from historical partnership, how it's structured through cooperation formats, how it's challenged, and what calls for renewed collaboration. So what is important here to mention is that European Union and United States has deep-rooted cybersecurity partnership, established early in 2000 and supported by various collaborative frameworks like working groups and strategic dialogues. However, this relationship has faced challenges, particularly after Edward Snowden's revelations, leading to a pause in bilateral cyber dialogues since 2018. So despite this, there are calls for renewed cooperation, emphasizing that need for a united approach to cyber threats and the defense of an open internet against any authoritarian pressures. Here, I would like to point out maybe European Union and United States enhanced cooperation on cybersecurity. So the latest research, 2024. So what, excuse me, what we can see here is that European Union and United States have strengthened their cybersecurity partnership. They're focusing on enhancing mutual resilience and securing global cyberspace. A joint statement emphasized that importance of collaboration in addressing evolving cyber threats has been made. So here are key initiatives, and they include the European and US Joint Cyber Safe Products Action Plan, which aims to align cybersecurity standards for all IoT products and deepen cooperation in critical infrastructure protection and AI security. So we can also say here that additionally, the EU committed to US-led counter-ransomware initiative, pledging not to pay any ransoms to cyber criminals. And here I would like to just point out how NATO is involved in our cyberspace and cybersecurity. So what is important here to say is that since 2016, NATO has recognized cyberspace as an operational domain. So it allowing cyber attacks to potentially trigger Article 5, the Mutual Defense Clause. So the Alliance has bolstered its cyber capabilities with initiatives like cyber rapid reaction action teams and cyber operations centers. I would lastly say here that NATO Cyber Defense Pledge emphasizes all member nations that they must strengthen their cyber infrastructure, acknowledging the importance of the EU and NATO partnership in this effort. So thank you. This was my presentation.
Thank you very much for exceptional presentation. It was very interesting. I appreciate it. And our next speaker will be Dr. Joanna Nowicka from Angelus Silesius Academy of Applied Sciences, and she will tell us about the role of multinational corporation in shaping sustainable development.
Okay, thank you for announcement, but I see that you can't see me, but I think I will show you my presentation. So give me one moment. Yeah, tell me please, do you see my presentation?
We can see the presentation and we can hear you very well.
Yeah, okay, that's nice. Okay, so thank you for announcement once again, and yeah, I would like to say in my presentation about the role of multinational corporation in shaping sustainable development. It's very important to know about the advantages and the disadvantages of multinational corporations. Multinational corporation MNCs play a pivotal role in the shaping sustainable development globally due to their vast resources, influence, and reach across the borders. And what is important, I would like to say about some topics. So innovation and technology transfer, global supply chain and management, corporate social responsibility, economic contributions, and influence on policy and regulation. And the first one, innovation and technology transfer. MNCs are often at the forefront of developing and implementing sustainable technologies, and they have the resources to invest in research and development. They have resources, they have people, they have capital, and they have possibilities for green technologies which can significantly reduce environmental impact. And it means that they have sustainable technologies. And they can improve and they can use them. So the next is MNCs can facilitate the transfer of sustainable technologies to developing countries, helping them leapfrog older, more polluting technologies and move directly to more sustainable practices. And here are some examples. For example, Siemens is a global leader in the development of smart grid technology, which optimizes the delivery of electricity and integrates renewable energy sources like the wind and solar power. And Siemens smart grid solutions have been developed in various countries. General Electronic, which heavily involved in the innovation of and production of wind turbines and other renewable energy technologies. And for example, here is this highlight offshore wind turbine is one of the most powerful wind turbines in the world and designed to significantly reduce the cost of offshore wind energy. Tesla. It's worth to say about Tesla. Tesla has revolutionized the automotive industry with its electronic vehicles, which significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And it's worth to say about the Tesla's innovations in battery technology, which and it's also contributed to more effective energy storage solution, which are crucial for integrating renewable energy sources in the grid. Here are only you can see only the few examples, but go to the next. So the global supply chain management, MNCs have the ability to influence their entire supply chain, promoting sustainability by sourcing materials responsibly, reducing waste, and ensuring ethical labor practice. It will lead to the sustainable more sustainable chain management, and by adopting a circular economy practices, MNCs can minimize waste and make better use of resources, and which can lead to the circular economy. And here are some examples. So, for example, Walmart project, which has aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in its supply chain by 1 billion metric tons by 2030. And the project involves working with suppliers to implementing sustainable practices such as reducing energy use, minimizing waste, and promoting the use of renewable energy. And Walmart has also commitment to sourcing agriculture products like palm oil, beef, and seafood for sustainable resources. And it's worth to say, and it's very important to say that they collaborates with the company collaborates with suppliers and NGOs, and to improve sustainability standards across its supply chain. And of course, a very famous, world famous Unilever has committed to sourcing 100% of its agricultural raw materials sustainability by 2030. And the next to say is a corporate social responsibility. Many MNCs have integrated corporate social responsibility into their business model, focusing on environmental sustainability, fair labor practices, and community development. And MNC are increasingly linked with corporate social responsibility and with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and which aims to address global challenges such as poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, and peace. And here are some examples. So, for example, Coca-Cola's efforts, CSR efforts include a strong focus on water sustainability, and the company has committed to replenishing 100% of the water it used in the beverage back to the nature and communities. And Starbucks is commitment to ethical sourcing 100% of its coffee through its coffee and farmer equity practice program, which ensures that coffee is grown and processed in ways that are socially, environmentally, and economically responsible. And another is the influence on policy and regulation. So MNC have the power to influence government policies and regulations by voting, but by advocating for stronger environmental regulation and sustainability standards that can help drive system changes that promote sustainable development. And MNCs often operate in multiple countries with varying regulations. By adopting global standards for sustainability, they can help raise the bar worldwide, encouraging the other businesses to follow suit. And some examples. So, for example, IKEA has been a strong advocate for climate action, using its influence to push for stronger environmental regulation at both the national and international levels, and the company is a member of the We Mean Business Coalition, which calls for government to adopt more ambitious climate policies in line with the Paris Agreement. And in Unilever, it's a leading voice in advocating for policies that promote sustainable development. And economic contribution means contribute to sustainable development by creating job and stimulating economic growth in the countries where they operate. And however, this must be balanced with ensuring that economic activities do not harm local environment or communities. And means often invest in infrastructure projects in the countries where they operate, which can include sustainable energy projects, water treatment facilities, and sustainable transportation networks. And here's some examples. For example, Nestle contributes to sustainable economic development by investing in rural communities where its resources, raw materials. And Toyota is a major employer globally with manufacturing plants in numerous countries and has committed to supporting local suppliers and partners. Coca-Cola, as a large employer and buyer of agricultural products, plays a significant role in economies and of the countries where it operates, especially in integrates like sugar, fruit, and coffee, and some challenges and criticism. And despite this potential of this means, there are some topic which can be treated like the criticism for them. So environmental degradation, so some means have been accused of contributing to environmental degradation, particularly in developing countries where regulation may be weaker. Exploiting of labor, so there are concerns that means might exploring cheap labor in developing countries, paying low wages and providing poor working conditions, and profit over sustainability. So they engaging that some of means, and they are engaging in greenwashing, where they promote themselves as environmentally friendly without making sustainable substantial challenges. And yeah, it's worth to say that yeah. In my presentation, you can see a lot of advantages that means and how means has positive influence on sustainable policy. But there have been several corporate scandals involving multinational corporations where their practices related to sustainable development has been called into question. For example, works Volkswagen emission scandal, so known as Dieselgate, in 2015. When Volkswagen was found to have installed and million of diesel vehicles worldwide to cheat emission test. Nestle has focused numerous controversies over its water extraction practice. Coca-Cola has faced criticism for its water usage in several countries, including India, Mexico, where it has been accused of depleting local water resources. And Samsung has faced criticism and legal challenges over poor working conditions and exporting to harmful chemical in its supply chain, particularly in factories in South Korea and China. And multinational corporations have a significant role in playing shaping sustainable development. They have the potential to drive positive changes through innovation, sustainable supply chain, SRR initiative. They must also address the challenges and criticism associated with their global operation. And there is something like the dark side. While many companies publicly commit to sustainability, this scandals which I say and notice reveal our challenges in maintaining those commitments across all areas of their operation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for very interesting presentation. And now I would like to introduce our last speaker in this panel, Dr. Tomasz Podolak from Law Enforcement Agency, who will tell us about the Pegasus affair in Poland, implications for the law enforcement agencies and society.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Very good.
Great. So my name is Dr. Tomasz Podolak. Today I would like to give a presentation on Pegasus spyware affair in Poland and its implications for law enforcement agencies and society. But first, let me upload the presentation. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I know we are on a tight schedule, therefore I'm going to be time efficient, however, as informative and substantive as possible. The agenda of my presentation looks as follows. First of all, I'm going to present my topic's relevance and importance. Then, NSO Pegasus as an example of advanced spyware and its capabilities. Couple of words about Pegasus affair in Poland with its implications for Polish law enforcement institutions as well as society. And at the end, I want to draw some conclusions. So why this topic is so relevant? Well, because in ongoing debate in public space, stress is put on spyware's impact on public rights and all the accompanying controversies. In my opinion, such approach is important and should be continued. Nonetheless, very few analyze this issue in terms of law enforcement agencies, effectiveness in combating crime and terrorism, as well as advantages for public safety. Moreover, I strongly believe that usage of advanced spyware tools should be analyzed and discussed by academic community. Mobile devices. They play a huge role in our everyday life, whether we like it or not. As we can see on the chart there has been an incredible rise in number of mobile devices used worldwide. It is predicted that by 2029, there will be more than 6 billion smartphone users. The daily amount of time spent on using internet by average smartphone user has also risen from 1 hour, 38 minutes in 2014 to almost 4 hours in third quarter of 2023. Smartphones are used in almost every aspect of our lives, to talk, to shop, to pay. That's why they became such an important source of information, both for companies and law enforcement institutions. Now I'm going to discuss NSO Pegasus as an example of advanced spyware and its capabilities. The photo on this slide depicts the alleged control panel of Pegasus operator. Why Pegasus is just an example of sophisticated spyware? Because Pegasus software designed by Israeli group NSO is not the only one on the market. Actually, there's a rising demand for this type of solutions, and as we can see, there are many cyber wiretapping solutions offered by different companies. Finfisher by Launch IT Solutions, Galileo by Hacking Team, Hermit by RCS Labs, Predator by Citrox, Graphite by Paragon Solutions, and Sherlock by Kangaroo. NSO Group Technologies. NSO standing for Niv, Shaliv, and Omri. The names of the company's founders is an Israeli cyber intelligence firm primarily known for its spyware Pegasus, which is capable of remote zero-click surveillance of smartphones. It employed almost 500 people as of 2017. NSO claims that it provides authorized governments with technology that helps them combat terror and crime. The company says that it deals with government clients only. Pegasus spyware is classified as a weapon by Israel, and any export of the technology must be approved by the government. Let's move now to Pegasus capabilities. First stage is hacking the victim's mobile device, which means gaining access to the root account. This is done by malicious links or zero-click attack. On this slide, we can see examples of malicious links sent to victim's mobile device. In that case, social engineering is used, meaning the content of message should encourage victim to open the link. Zero-click attack means executing malicious code on the device without any action taken by the user. It means you don't have to click on anything, open any files, and still Pegasus will take full control of your mobile device. And one more term that should be mentioned is zero-day. Zero-day is vulnerability in software or hardware that is typically unknown to the vendor and for which no patch or other fix is available. What is also worth mentioning is that manufacturers have their bug bounty programs where ethical hackers can receive money by sharing zero-day vulnerabilities. However, instead of sharing vulnerabilities with manufacturers, hackers can get more money from private companies just like ZeroDium. ZeroDium is Israeli company which buys up all kinds of vulnerabilities. And on this slide, we can see ZeroDium's payouts for vulnerabilities found in mobile devices. As we can see, for a zero-click vulnerability, hackers can receive up to $2.5 million. We can only assume that such vulnerabilities are then sold with a profit to companies like NSO Group. Pegasus can gain access to smartphones' whole internal memory, which means all data like SMSs, phone book, list of telephone calls, instant messengers data, photos and videos can be seen by operator, even those created before the wiretapping warrant was issued by the court. Moreover, devices components like cameras, microphone, or GPS locator can be used without user's permission and knowledge. For example, microphone can be used to transmit data even if the mobile device is not being used. Pegasus software was bought and used by Polish Central Anti-Corruption Bureau, which was confirmed by Polish Supreme Audit Office. It was also shared with other Polish law enforcement and intelligence services in cases of most serious crimes and threats. There were suspicions that Pegasus was used to wiretap political opposition by a ruling party. In February 2024, a special parliamentary committee was established to look into the cases of abuse of Pegasus software in Poland. As a result of events that took place, public trust for law enforcement agencies, intelligence services, and the government itself was undermined. I'm not going to say that Pegasus was misused because there are ongoing investigations actually, and special parliamentary committee was established whose objectives is to determine that. However, two facts for me are undisputed. The existence of Pegasus and its capabilities should never be revealed to public, and law enforcement agencies should not be used for achieving political goals. Tools like Pegasus have to exist in arsenal of services responsible for public safety. However, such powerful cyber weapon should be only used in limited and most serious cases. Moreover, more independent control should be applied to when and how such methods are used. So, what were the problems with Pegasus in Poland? Firstly, and which is the most important thing actually, is that Polish law was not adopted for tools like Pegasus. Using Pegasus changes phone settings and interferes with devices' internal memory, which is not acceptable by law. It also gives access to data on target's phone created before the wiretapping warrant was issued by the court. Pegasus should rely on infrastructure located in Poland, which is obvious in terms of security and public interest. Operational data collected by Pegasus are extremely sensitive, and if they go into the wrong hands, they could pose threat not only to individuals, but to Polish internal security itself. So, what are the implications for law enforcement institutions after the Pegasus affair in Poland? Firstly, methods used by law enforcement agencies are now known to criminals, which has negative impact on effectiveness. For example, calls and messages are now more often exchanged through encrypted channels and cannot be intercepted. In general, methods, tools, and tactics used by law enforcement institutions should never be known to criminals, as they constantly adopt countermeasures for conducted criminal activity. As a result of events that took place, public trust for law enforcement agencies, intelligence services, and the government was undermined. It has devastating effect on cooperation between society and law enforcement. And as we know, law enforcement institutions cannot operate successfully without help and trust of society. It is also very unlikely that any service or law enforcement agency in Poland will be equipped with tools like Pegasus in the nearest future. More and more criminal and terrorist activity goes into cyberspace, hence using this kind of tools is crucial. Illegal activity is constantly evolving, and so should technology used by law enforcement institutions. As far as society is concerned, law enforcement agencies are not anymore considered as institutions which provide security and combat crime. Unfortunately, many people treat them as hostile entities whose prime objective is to spy on society. And, which is my personal opinion, society is in potential danger, as presently there is no advanced eavesdropping technology which can be used to combat more serious crimes and prevent terrorist attacks. So, what are the conclusions? In my opinion, this type of solutions should be designed by the state and not by private companies. It should also rely on IT infrastructure available in our country, and its functionality should be tailored to applicable law. As a result of events that took place, trust for law enforcement agencies and intelligence services was undermined. Due to the fact that law may have been broken by politicians as well as officers, special parliamentary committee was established. Unfortunately, it will take years to rebuild that trust. Spyware like Pegasus is now feared by Polish society as well as politicians, and it is unlikely that any service or law enforcement agency will be equipped with tools like that in the nearest future. Unfortunately, the same society is in potential danger, as presently there is no advanced eavesdropping technology which can be used to combat more serious crimes and prevent terrorist attacks. But let's think about it from a different angle. What if such technology is not used only to combat crime, but to save people's lives? For example, to locate and rescue someone who wants to commit a suicide, or to save an abducted child. My point is that not many people try to find and understand the advantages of advanced spyware tools. However, righteous citizens should not be concerned that this kind of tools will ever be used against them. Regardless, future research should be conducted to establish how to maintain balance between civil liberties, law enforcement effectiveness, and homeland security. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions or comments, I will be more happy to answer them.
Thank you very much for a very informative and very interesting presentation. I have a little update. Thankfully, Mr. Hugo Stonoyalo, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, was able to join us. So we will have one more presentation in this panel. And it will be about the foreign policy shortcomings of Western democracies. And the stage is yours.
Sorry, I hope my camera works and everything else. I couldn't get a proper presentation prepared, so I'm just going to kind of lecture you about this. It's based mostly on, well, practical experience, having traveled and studied and worked in a couple of countries by now, and having seen how foreign policy works for different levels of power in international relationships. So first of all, we have to understand that for now we're still in a way in the unipolar world, dominated by the United States presence, and in a sense you have structures like the European Union that expand that presence of the US in the rest of the world. You have a certain idea of liberal democracy that is promoted by the US, and it's widely accepted by the rest of the countries, at least in the West. Then you have what are called rogues and rivals to US foreign supremacy, mostly Russia and China. And then you have countries that are achieving a great power status, such as India. And then you have regional powers here and there, Iran, Saudi Arabia. And in principle, the way foreign policy works, at least if you are in a Western country, is that you try to uphold internally that ideal of liberal democracy, rule of law, and a certain standards of human rights. And if you're on the outskirts, let's say you're on the frontier marches of this world order, such as we are here in Poland, then you have a duty of defense that is pretty much bigger than the one that you have in other countries. It's not coincidence that Poland is one of the most important partners in NATO right now for the US, considering that we are very close to Russia, and that defense expenditure in Poland is probably higher than the one that you have in Germany or in any other country that does not have nuclear capacity. Well, probably even more than the UK, and the UK does have nuclear capacity. International relationships work in a very different scheme than most of law and national security. Well, national security not so much, but law in general, because international relationships are based purely on practical aspects. Sure, you see there is an international law, and there are courts, there are organizations, and there's an ideal of international law. And at least if you're a Western citizen, if you belong to a Western country, and if you work or you have studied this area, you kind of have this idea always in your head, is like, we have to keep international law, we have to keep the rule of law, we cannot go against what law says, those or defines and promotes. And at least that's how it works in the West. When you go to other countries, especially when you begin to study Chinese statesmanship, and you study the way Chinese government officials, especially high-ranking officials of the Chinese Communist Party, are thinking their policy, you realize that it's a completely different thing. For them, it's not about this ideal rule of law on the national or international sense, and it's not about what we must preserve or what we must really enforce in other countries. You see, like, the idea of exporting democracy and promoting democracy and promoting free markets that the US and the European Union try to work in other parts of the world, the Latin America or Africa. It's mostly idealistic thinking at best. Why? And this is where Western democracy have a lot of shortcomings, that there's a lot of hubris, there's a lot of pretentiousness, in thinking that the Western way is the best just because it has worked for a couple countries that have very specific historical characteristics that have allowed them to get, a certain form of governance and a certain level of wealth after years and years of war. So when you think at how these other rogues and rivals to U.S. hegemony, to European way of life, because the U.S. is a hero, that European mindset from hundreds of years ago in a way, you see that the West is really short-sighted in how to create a proper foreign policy that is, not only acceptable for countries that are not in their sphere, but also that is kind of realistic about what they really want. And there comes, a lot of the hypocrisy from both parties. There's an hypocrisy of why, China or Russia want to interfere in other countries. There's also a Western hypocrisy on why, they still promote this kind of thinking in countries that are not at the same level of development as them, especially political and economic. So just let's think about something very, very quick. In Europe, you had the continent divided for pretty much 50 years during the Cold War, and most of the countries that managed to escape the Soviet sphere of influence, they adopted a Western policy and they adopted, a Western stance very quickly. You see this especially in Poland, and you see how for Poland has been mostly good, but Poland still has retained a lot of its own internal institutions. And U.S. interference in Poland has not been as great as it has been in other countries in other parts of the region. That extends also to Europe. The U.S. has been mostly a force for good to promote this idea of liberal democracy in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe, and it has worked. But at the same time, the U.S. has been very pragmatic, especially during the first years of the Cold War, to promote mostly what they needed was suited best for their priorities at that moment. That's why you had the U.S. tolerating dictatorships like the one of Francisco Franco in Spain and the one of Salazar in Portugal and the colonial regime in Greece. Well, after that, after the Cold War ended, it all shifted to no, we have to promote that countries have a democratic form of government in which there are elections and there's a change of government every now and then, because that's the US way, that's the US American democratic enlightened way. When you have similar phenomena promoted by China or Russia, it doesn't happen the same way because their goals are not really the same. What Russia has done in Ukraine has pretty much been a very different thing. They break away the country. They try to gain or force the will of the Russian-speaking parts of the country so that they can get re-annexed to the Russian territory. What China has done in some of their own parts and also to promote unrest in other parts of Asia is like, just think about how the South China Sea policy works. They pretty much just send ships to territorial waters of other countries, of the Philippines, of Vietnam, of Japan, and they just decide unilaterally that since they are in control of those islands in the South China Sea, those islands belong to them and they're part of the territorial lands and waters of China. And that goes when it comes to foreign policy that is more soft. You're not outright conquering or you're not outright creating permanent presence and influence, but you're trying just to allow countries to guide themselves in a certain way that is favorable towards your foreign policy interests if you're either the West or the rest. And when it comes to Latin America, where it comes to Africa, that's what happens. In Latin America, U.S. foreign presence has been always, a permanent feature, but at the same time, it has been reduced so much as of late because the U.S. foreign policy is not well thought anymore, especially because it has become very idealistic and doesn't understand the own realities and the historical background of the countries in which they are intervening and in which they are trying to support their idea. sure, it's great if you can promote democratic institutions and you can promote rule of law in any countries. Those are good things if that's what you believe in. And in principle, it works well if you have people who are willing to implement those ideas of policy in their own countries, adopted to whatever circumstance you have. But the problem is that most of Western foreign policy experts and most of Western foreign policy practitioners, they don't know the history and they don't know the circumstances of the country they're trying to advise. And that happens a lot, especially in the West, because there's not a tradition of studying and adapting your ideas for other countries. The reason a lot of the U.S. Interventions in the Middle East have failed as of late is because they have relied so much on experts that they just know information about the places and the things they're trying to run, but they have absolutely no idea of the history and they have absolutely no idea of the language and of the institutions of the culture. For instance, in Afghanistan, when the presence, like U.S. presence, was increased by the end of 2010, 2011, and they tried to implement a proper Western democracy governance system in Afghanistan, it failed because of most of the people in charge of that were foreign educated. They had a certain idea of we have to make it like the West because the West is supporting us. But it took what, like 10 years, 15 years at most for everything to revert back to how it was before, including all of the losses in human rights challenges you had. Why? Because people didn't stop to think, how are we able to succeed in here? What are the challenges that we're actually facing? It's not only about language, it's about culture as well. When you look at foreign policy, French foreign policy in Africa, it just happens that the way France keeps on having influence and the way France keeps on having power in Africa is that they still control the money supply. They still control the monetary policy of many African countries in, the franc CFA and other currencies that are under control of the Bank of France, of National Bank of France. And they are not outright colonies anymore as they used to be in the 60s, but they're still under, that kind of control. And in the last few years, you have seen a lot of infighting and a lot of reversals of that foreign policy because they find other countries that are willing, to support them for their own reasons, of course, in trying to stop being part of, a certain sphere of influence. In Burkina Faso, for instance, that's what happened. There was a military coup. The new Burkina Faso junta that is governing them has gotten closer ties to Russia and to China, especially, in exchange for their support, both internationally and logistically. They're willing to give them, rare earth material mines, extraction licenses so they can keep on doing business with them and getting what these people need in order to either create technology or create weapon systems. But they get an ally. It's always a matter of give and take. It's very transactional. The problem in general and the shortcoming of Western democracies in foreign policy is that the West has become too idealistic in their own thinking about international relations. They have thought that there is a perfect model in how the American government works and how the American way of doing things is, and they have stopped thinking that different peoples, different places, different languages, different cultures have different circumstances, different elements that make them completely distinct from what the US experience has been. In Iran, this is a very important point. The reason Iran worked for a while before the Islamic Revolution is that the support of Western powers didn't interfere with their own forms. Iran was an empire in the sense that it had a monarchy. It had monarchical institutions that were very tied to the Iranian people and to the Iranian history, and they were in line with their long tradition. After the Islamic Revolution, that was cut off, and the new ruling powers, like in that moment, Soviet Russia, they embrace that because, you know, it's not about the idealism of certain, you know, superpowers comes to think that our way is the best, and if it's not made our way, it's not going to work. This goes to what happened in the Balkans in the 90s. One of the solutions for the Balkan crisis that ended up becoming the Yugoslav wars was the restoration of the Yugoslav and then of the Serbian monarchy when countries were already splitting up. And there was this proposal that was sent to the U.S. State Department that, you know, the head of the former royal family of Serbia, of Yugoslavia, is willing to return and to take the reins of government in Serbia so we can stop with the bloodshed and with all of the issues that we're having because these former communist officials are willing to keep on with the ethnic genocide. And the US response was, we don't do monarchy. You can prevent a lot of catastrophes. Like, you can prevent wars, you can prevent conflicts just by understanding that different cultures have different institutions and different forms in which, you know, historically they have worked, and it has given them at least stability, not outright peace, but stability. The US and Russia right now and China, they don't understand that because as superpowers, they think that their way is the best. Some powers are not, you know, as they don't have that much hubris of thinking our way is the best because they still are not in the same position. Like, that's the reason Russia goes of in one moment from being very supportive of the Orthodox Church and of being very close to the former imperial family, to the Romanovs, to the other moment being, you know, very reminiscent of the Soviet legacy, is because they're still in a position in which they don't find their way in. They keep with their proper system right now, which is a kleptocracy, in which, you know, you have Putin, who is very much all powerful when it comes to government, and his clique of oligarchs around him, which control key industries in Russia. But that is not as dissimilar how it used to be run in the Russian Empire. The problem is that Russia is, you know, not exactly a superpower in the power of the US, but it's very close. In China, what happens is that the Chinese people stop thinking, oh, no, our Chinese way is, you know, a form of Marxist-Leninism that we have to import to the rest of the world. They instead kind of, at least in the words of Xi Jinping, they have realized, no, our Chinese way to communism is not the Chinese way to communism, it's Chinese tradition. We're in the same line as, you know, the mandate of heaven of all of the former emperors before us. We're a millenarian civilization that has a clear idea of how foreign policy should be ruled. As we are emperors in all of our sphere. Everyone else can be an emperor, but they're going to be kings below us. It doesn't happen. Everyone else is going to be, you know, sovereign, but they're sovereign under China. They're not sovereign against China. In the US, the problem is that they still promote this idea that every country is sovereign and every country has, you know, a voice, and every country has a matter to say when it comes to foreign policy, as long as they're liberal and democratic. And it just happens that many countries are moving away from that line. And when you think about key allies, especially in a region that can be very violent, like, you know, Europe has historically been, we only had peace in Europe for the last 60, 70 years. That can always change. You know, if you keep alienating people because you're not willing to, because the US is not willing to tolerate forms of government that are not liberal democracy, then you're going to end up in a point in which you're going to have battlefields all over because people still want to have things running their way, even if their way is different to the one of the superpowers. In the Spanish School of Oviedo, which is a philosophical school of thought, there are some people who have developed this idea of dialectic of empires, in which the biggest actions in history are made by the confrontation of big powers, or in general of states. And you see that I always come again to historical examples, because in the historical examples, you see the shortcomings of foreign policy. The biggest issues that happen when one superpower thinks that their way is the only way is that they start to lose presence, they start to lose ground, they start to lose support in the places that need the most of their, you know, influence and of their logistical support and of their logistical coordination. The Spanish Empire was broken because the people who were running Spain stopped acting according to the Spanish way, and instead they, because of family ties mostly, because the new king of Spain ended up being a French prince during the War of Spanish Succession, and that was, 300 years ago. They just adopted the French way of centralization and autarky instead of realizing that, well, the Spanish Empire was not run like that. The Spanish Empire was run in a polysynodial way. That meant, councils for each part of the empire, and they were pretty much autonomous and free to do as long as, they were loyal to the monarchy and to a certain idea of religion. Religion was the ideology of the Spanish Empire, and that happens in the rest. The problem is that, some superpowers are not willing to tolerate dissidence when it comes to forms of government, as long as they keep on receiving some of the benefit from that. And it worked, in the Cold War, it worked because there was a moment for pragmatism. The US was willing to tolerate a wider range of different forms of government because there was a bigger enemy on the other side, which was Soviet Russia. Right now, the US has become very stubborn in their idealism of, liberal Western democracies. And it happens that the enemies the US and the Western world are fighting are becoming the underdogs, and they're willing to be more pragmatic. Russia is willing to back up any liberal government as long as they can receive an entry point into the rest of the world. And China is willing to back up whatever they can back as long as they receive, entrance into the economy of those countries. And once you control the economy of those countries, you have a lot of leverage that the US doesn't have anymore. The shortcomings of Western democracies, the foreign policy, is that we have become idealistic instead of becoming pragmatists. And foreign policy is not the realm of idealism. Foreign policy is the realm of practical ideas, practical solutions, practical thought. You need to work with what you've given, and you need to make it work because you don't have other opportunities. This is not academic. There is, money, people, cultures at stake when you make a decision that relies on, sending weapons or sending advisors to set up a government. You have big failures like what has happened in Afghanistan, and you have moderate successes like what happened in Central Eastern Europe. But those are 20 years apart. More than that, those are almost 30 years apart. You cannot keep on insisting on forms that are no longer working if the world is changing around you. And the rivals of, the Western world have understood that, and they're willing to work whatever way works for them as long as they keep on top. The US, liberal Western democratic world has forgotten about pragmatism because, ideas are more important for them, and ideas are not winning battles anymore. What is winning battles is just the way to be able to make things work, especially when you're losing allies and when you're losing ground. And even if things work for a while, you might end up with years, decades of frozen conflict, just like what is already happening in Ukraine, just like what is already happening in the South China Sea, just like what might happen in some places in Latin America with internal enemies. At one point, people will have to stop, thinking about certain ideas, just the abstractions of rule of law and free markets and, the free world, and start thinking what is working for our peoples and what is not working for our peoples, and how are we willing to defend what's best for us. Because some things work on one moment, some things stop working on the other. And if that changes, then you might end up in a very worse position. I don't know what would be worse for people in places like in Central Eastern Europe. If you're dominated economically by the Chinese, if you're under constant Russian intervention, as it already happened, or if just imposed by the US or Brussels and the European Union to accept political opinions that are against your tradition. I mean, there's a reason why Europe has, the two velocities. Why the East is more conservative than the West, and how the West is already facing problems in Europe. But those are not, debates for ideas. Those are debates for actual practical policy. And most policymakers in the Western world have stopped being practical. They just think about implementing abstract ideas. If you apply that to the foreign policy sense, you will have a lot of troubles because the West is as diverse as the rest of the world. You have different opinions, you have different cultures, you have different languages, you have different traditions. And each tradition, has a way of life that can be preserved for the best of their people. But if you keep on insisting on promoting things that are against those ways of life, the only thing you're going to end up is promoting unrest, and people will stop believing in the Western idea at some point. And so far, the Western idea is good. But in order, if you want to keep on having the Western idea and the Western way of life, you don't need to fight for the idea. You need to fight for what it creates, what is good for you. Wealthy societies, mostly free societies, but in the traditions that, they actually work. Poland worked for a reason. Hungary worked for a reason until some years ago. France used to work for a reason. Spain used to work for a reason. The US used to work for a reason. They are not working because ideas have prevailed so much that people stop caring about what matters, which was, the practical results of those ideas. And that happens when you have wars upcoming as well. That's it.
Thank you very much for a very informative and very interesting lecture. And now I would like to take the opportunity while we have a moment of free time to share information with you about our partner, EduWorld. EduWorld is a Polish company that helps students apply for studies abroad, from finding the right university and writing application essays to arranging flights to the new country. So if you are interested in this, I will attach more information in the chat. And now we have a time for a question or two. So I would like to invite anyone with questions or comments to share them with us. Do you have any questions?
Hi, this is Sanda. Yes, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Hi. I would like to ask Mr. Podolak if he's still with us. I found your presentation very interesting, and I would like
Thank
to.
you.
Yeah, it's very, very, very my topic that I also like to read about, and I will read more because I'm not like aware of everything that happened. But I was just wondered, how did you solve this affair in connection to social media? So how was were there any implications in social media, and how did you intervene, or how did you were there any cases that you needed to solve? That's just my question regarding that.
Okay, so if I understand correct, what were the consequences, in social media after this Pegasus affair in Poland? Is that correct?
Yeah.
It all started with a series of articles by many newspapers and the news portals, which presented the government and they connected law enforcement agencies, especially Central Anti-Corruption Bureau, in a negative side. In my opinion, law enforcement agencies should be separated, definitely separated from the ruling party, from politics in general.
Yeah.
And there are two aspects that give effectiveness and success in protecting society against all threats and ensuring that everything works correctly. This is a long-term strategy in terms of law enforcement, as well as your field is concerned, cyber security strategy. and it should consequently be followed, because what is bad for any service is connection to the political cycle, that the new ruling party comes and then the strategy and the goals are different. Sometimes I think the society and the greater good, which is safety in general, is omitted by politicians. And as I mentioned before, it all started with a series of articles, and you asked specifically about social media.
Yeah.
Yes, it could be definitely seen that the society is having bad attitude towards all this situation, and they even started comparing this whole situation to the former political system, where obviously law enforcement agencies and security services were used to serve the party, not the society, right?
Yeah.
But as I mentioned in my presentation, I wouldn't like to speculate or make any statements whether it happened or not, because there are ongoing investigations. There is a special parliamentary committee, and this is their job to solve this situation and press charges if needed. But here I would like to speak and voice my opinion only on the scientific background and the scientific discussion, right? So this is how I see it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, so I also have a question to Mr. Podolak. You mentioned that there is currently no tool like Pegasus in Poland, and that society is exposed to danger as a result of this. Could you elaborate on this issue? What can we do? Maybe
Yes, this is a very good question. First of all, instead of denying this kind of tools, we should start a debate. Politicians should do that. It should be also done on academic background. How we can introduce such tools which in the era of communication and activity that takes place in a cyberspace and is mostly encrypted, and solutions that we have don't enable us to follow this kind of communication. So what should we do to introduce such tools? In my opinion, it was a good solution to introduce that, but it wasn't done properly. As I said, Polish law was not suited for this kind of spyware framework which was used, because first of all, it gave too much power to the law enforcement agency. It could locate the person. It could listen to video calls, the regular calls, calls via instant messengers, and even, as I said, you put your phone on the table, you don't do anything, and it could transmit what is going on in the background, and you are probably on a business meeting, right? Because this is no secret that wiretapping is present in Poland for many years, and it's constituted by law. However, there are some limitations. Wiretapping is limited only to calls and messages transmitted via GSM channel, and only in the period where court agrees to that. So the law enforcement agency applies for put a wiretap on a person, and court agrees for 3 months, mostly at the beginning. And this is the period of time where calls, messages can be intercepted. However, if a person uses instant messengers, other encrypted communication channels, all this data and all these messages sent are not visible to law enforcement agency. So this tool, like I'm saying, like Pegasus, because this is not the only tool on the market, but it enabled, for example, to monitor terrorist activity who communicate via, I don't know, for example, a Signal messenger, right? So this is, does it answer your question, or should I elaborate a little bit more?
No, I'm very grateful and I appreciate this answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Once again. Do we have any other questions? Okay, if there are no further questions, we can conclude panel number 2. If there are any technical issues arise, I will be available through email and my phone. I will also send you a link to the panel number 3, like I did in this panel. And we will meet in the panel number 2 in a few minutes on 2 p.m. Thank you so much for your presence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.